Hello, I'm David Yorkshire, and welcome to another episode of Mjolnir the Movies. And this is episode 10, or X in Roman numerals. So we ought to be doing American History X, really, didn't we? And get our channel banned or something. Anyway, we're not doing American History X. We're doing Equilibrium, the 2002 dystopian film written and directed by Kurt Wimmer, as an excuse, really, to look at dystopian fiction in general, especially as I don't rate this film very highly. As, as ever, I'm with Neil Westwood and James. And you rate this more highly than I do, don't you, Neil? So perhaps you can start us off as to why you like this film.
I like it because it was a little bit different when it came out. It was a bit like Matrix, but to me it felt a little bit more special than the Matrix because in the Matrix of what we've spoken about before, Neo, in order to wake up and see the truth, the first thing he has to do is swallow a pill that's given to him by a black guy. But in Equilibrium, the main character, the main protagonist of the movie, realizes that if he doesn't take that drug, then you'll see the truth. And that's why it was a little bit more special to me, why I connected with it. it
Right. Um, it is. I mean, an unkind way of putting it would be that it rips off the Matrix, but actually, I think it rips off an awful lot of different
oh, yeah, it
films
rips
and
off a lot of
and
films.
and, and books and
Yeah.
texts. Oh dear. In fact, I see it pretty much as a patchwork quilt of other books and films and so on, which we'll look at as we go along.
Yeah.
Uh, so I suppose we could probably start with a little comparison of the Matrix and this film. Um, One of the things certainly is the violence, the stylized violence, or as I would say about this film, the cartoon violence.
Yeah.
Certainly, one of the criticisms I have of this film is that the violence is almost comical. Now, towards the beginning, there is this scene where he walks into this shootout. He's standing bolt upright, and he walks into darkness. And there are two bunches of people at either side of the screen, and they fire at him while he's standing bolt upright, and they all magically miss him. Now, this sort of threw me because I thought immediately, he must be some kind of robot. Or because the thing about the Matrix is that it gets away with it with the stylized violence and everything and the dodging bullets and all that because it's a computer simulation. But this isn't. This is meant to be real life. And as the film wore on, I thought, oh right, so it's not about robots who are pretty indestructible. Then
Well,
these are meant to be real flesh and blood people, but for some reason they can get shot at and never and a bullet will never harm them. This is all a bit silly to me.
in its defense, let's look at lots of action movies from the past. The guy Audie Murphy, I think his name is, Clint Eastwood, John Wayne, they've all had foes attacking them, firing bows and arrows, machine guns, whatever. They seem to dodge bullets like they're heroes, but nobody really complains about that.
Now,
So it was almost like a homage to that sort of thing where people seem to just not get shot. Star Wars, for example. I mean, those stormtroopers. I mean, have they ever shot anything?
now, I,
Oh,
I just I
go.
just want I just want to stop you there a moment because Audie Murphy never got shot in real life.
Oh, sorry.
Eddie
Okay,
Audie Murphy dodged
Eddie
bullets
Murphy.
all the oh Eddie oh all right yeah
Sorry.
he's just ridiculous. But Audie Murphy was a real life war
Yeah,
hero and he dodged bullets all the way through the Second World War.
yeah,
So he gets a pass, but everybody else it's just nonsense. You're right.
yeah. But
I
so
think
it, but
the trouble with though with the violence aspect of it, it wasn't just for me. You could say, "Oh, that bit's silly." The problem was it was inconsistently silly. like at the start, he just stands in the dark, and then you see the way he moves his arms. You know, they deliberately show the arms moving at a blur speed. He doesn't move his body almost at all, but the arms just point in the right direction, like he's a heat-seeking missile,
yeah, yeah.
or like a robot. But yet later on, the violence is totally different when he starts using his abilities or training. It's totally different. It's much more like a normal Hong Kong kung fu stuff. It comes in, you think, well, what happened to that earlier scene where he could just stand and lean and his arms whipped about and pointed? So that was my trouble with it. Was the violence and or the abilities were inconsistent and the effects were inconsistent with it. Like that was the big showpiece meant to be showing the gun kata concept, but then later on when you see him in fights, he's just leaping and rolling about, and it's much more like Hong Kong kung fu. And I thought that's, to me, seems like the director didn't have an image in mind of what he wanted to show, or even with the showpiece gun kata, he couldn't consistently show it.
But then again, he was on that drug. It was Prosium too, I think they call it. He was on that drug when he could do all that cool stuff with the gun kata. But when he was off that, he had to rely on his own abilities and emotions to do that same thing and go up against guys who were still on that drug that gave him this kind of superhuman ability. Because and it doesn't like give you an ability, but it helps you concentrate and come down to a state of equilibrium where you can do these crazy things because you're not thinking too much. And that was the
Almost like
idea.
Richland.
Yeah, that's what the idea of the drug in the movie is about, is to take away your emotion, to give you an equilibrium of all emotions. And when he stops taking it, or I think he forgets to take it actually, which is strange because it's a clockwork thing. He forgets to take this drug originally. Then he
Brains
starts
one,
to,
isn't he?
yeah, that's right. It falls off the edge of the
Falls off
sink.
while he's shaving.
Yeah, and so he doesn't take it, and he gets these emotions suddenly. And I think the breaker, which is the breaker for most men, I would say, is that they take away the dog for execution, and that's when he realizes he gets that sudden jolt of despair that makes him realize that he's got to stop taking this stuff because he's seeing things. And that's why the fights are different towards the end of the movie because he's relying on his own abilities to do it.
Yeah, that is also a big inconsistency with the emotional states and everything. Because
Yeah, that was
even
a
when
bugbear
people,
with me.
yeah, even when people are taking the drugs, they're obviously having emotions.
Yeah.
Like what was the Tay Diggs? What was the name of the black
Oh,
grammaton
Brant.
cleric? Brandt. He's constantly got this shit-eating grin
Yeah.
all through the film. You think, is this guy meant to be emotional? He's talking about, I can sense emotions, and then you see him getting taken away, and he's screaming and shouting.
Yeah.
I thought that was bad. And then you see the fight between them, and he's obviously emotional there. I mean, I can't really blame the actors, but that the director should have said, no, wait a minute, I'm meant to be showing emotionless people here, so I need to direct these people to their performance. That to me was again another inconsistency in it. Even things like the cops who are meant to be sort of drugged up, you know, especially seeing as they show them with a lot of the time with the motorcycle helmet on.
And they all
You
start
see them,
panicking.
yeah, you see them panic or looking at each other in shock after the clerics do something impressive. You think that's not somebody without emotion.
Yeah, and then they're screaming like, shit, 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 he's a grammaton. And they're all
Yeah,
panicking. It's like, so this drug doesn't really work that well, does it?
but yet they're perfectly all right with watching a woman burn to death
Yeah.
who went into that thing showing less emotion than these cops. You know,
Yeah, yeah.
I mean, who would go into a furnace at gunpoint and not just take the bullet?
I am starting to see the flaws in this movie, if I'm honest with you, but there's something about it that's just, I really enjoyed it.
The one thing I thought was a really positive message was the fact that they showed that simple, all the kind of the good things in life, like connecting with animals, the sunrise, stuff like that, could burn through propaganda. You know, nature could still come up from inside him, despite the propaganda, the pills, whatever else. That was the sort
Yeah.
of positive message I could take from it. I like that aspect of it. The fact that it was
Yeah,
this sort of hero from that.
yeah.
Did you?
Just to go on to the police before we move on. This really pissed me off about the police in that there was so much smashing of these visors. Why the fuck did they not have perspex visors? Why? Why? You know,
All class.
Yeah.
The other thing that annoyed me is right at the start, you see those police which were dressed in a way you never saw again. It was kind of odd. They all had just the fatigues and caps. You never see them again in the whole film.
Right.
But they're all shooting at the windows in the most slapstick shootout ever, where it's like the footage if you ever see like the Liberian shoot gunfights in the streets.
Yeah.
But he's like, why doesn't they just throw a petrol bomb through the window and walk away? He wants to destroy everything in it and all the people in it, and he doesn't care about the building. And it's a brutal dictatorship. Wouldn't they just burn the building down with everybody in it? They
Yeah.
want to burn the contents anyway, because
That's
that's
right.
what they're trying to fight to.
that's right. There are some extreme flaws with the script. That is true. One of
It's
the
really
things.
cheesy, but when Mona Lisa he holds up that thing, oh, it's authentic. Why would he have that? He wants to burn anything artistic at all and emotional. Why would he need to authenticate the old pieces? He just burn them.
Yeah. Yeah.
Yeah, that's right.
That was done for the audience.
What's the difference between a copy and and the real thing? It's still it's still a picture that can give you emotions and things like that. Even the print of it would give you the same sort of emotion, surely.
Which brings up
It's
next question is when you look into this film, you find out it's a city state. Why would you store the Mona Lisa in a city state outside of somewhere? Don't know where, but you feel like it's somewhere around about America. Why would you store it all right on the outskirts of the city when it's just a city state? Wouldn't you just
Facing
move it?
directly upwards.
Huh?
Facing directly upwards from a trapdoor. Like
Yeah.
not wrapped up or anything like that. Just like
Just
laying
in the
there.
floor.
Yeah.
In there, and you see at the start they've got all the paintings just lying against the wall, like
Yeah.
like they were just going, just stick them there. There's the Mona Lisa.
Well, I think this comes down to basically narrative over logic, the narrative that they want to portray versus the a decent internal logic. Because the narrative that they want is that the city is sort of this place of bad, where bad things happen, where you have totalitarianism and everything, and then outside of that, where you get more towards nature and stuff like that, this is sort of the good area, and also where culture can happen and so on, because of course. Within the city, you have to get rid of all sort of culture and so on. This is actually a rip-off of a text that has been forgotten quite a bit by a lot of people, which is the daddy of all dystopian novels, which is We by Yevgeny Zemyatan. I
Okay.
don't know if you've read it or not.
No, I haven't read that one. I haven't even heard of it.
But it's been forgotten now. But Aldous Huxley ripped a lot of it, and a lot of people do, and because people don't realize that it's ripped off from We, because it's sort of been pushed aside and forgotten. They don't realize that it is a rip-off. But the thing is that I mean the city state is called Libria, isn't it? Which is
That's right.
sort of an ironic take on freedom, liberty. And the outside is called the Nether. Well, in Yevgeny Zemyatan's We, you have the one state, and then you have the green wall, and outside the green wall is sort of the nature and everything, and people living in natural states. Although actually, the people outside of that have mutated and become sort of hairy and stuff. But that's a by the by.
And if you notice the flag as well, the flag is pretty much a swastika, isn't it? I mean, it's like
a weird choice.
4 T's.
Consider the fact that they make it clear that city-state hates that regime and uses
Yeah.
it as a demonic figure, and they thought, well, let's just copy the figure we're demonizing and use it in our symbolism.
Yeah.
It doesn't make any sense.
Plus, and I'm not sure about this. I mean, I looked at the Wikipedia page for a little bit just to see if I could find out stuff about the actors in that. And I clicked on tetragrammaton. I didn't even know that was a word, like a real word. And it says on the wiki page something to do with in the Hebrew language, that's Hebrew for God or
Yeah,
Father.
Yahweh, the four-letter
Yeah.
name for God.
So they got the swastika flag, but the government's called the Tetragrammaton.
And of course, their symbol is a cross.
Yeah.
It's the four T's coming together makes the old style Christian
Yeah.
cross.
And yet at the same time, they've also got like the obligatory black guy playing the sort of cocky, I don't know, the cocky servant of Father, who's or whatever his name is, the guy who plays Robert the Bruce in Braveheart.
Yeah, McFadden,
That's one.
Angus McFadden. And he's like the voice of Father or something on the
Yeah.
council.
And Sean Pertwee, he's the sort of the puppet speaker, right? He's the one that comes on the loudspeakers and the TV screens. But I
And
don't.
and I didn't get that plot twist at all. They went, aha, Pertwee or Father isn't actually around. It's just me. And I thought, okay, it wasn't a shocking revelation because it made no difference to the plot whether Father was actually genuine or whether he was a hologram. It didn't
Yeah.
make any difference at all. So it was a plot twist that didn't serve any purpose. All it did was disappoint me because I quite liked Pertwee's performance compared to
Yeah.
McFadden. I thought he was a more interesting, and creepy leader.
Yeah. Yeah.
Yeah, I think that basically they've cobbled in a 1984 reference there because, of course, you never get to see who Big Brother is in 1984,
Right.
and Big Brother is just an abstraction in reality, as O'Brien sort of intimates. He doesn't really say that it is, but he sort of doesn't confirm or deny the reality of Big Brother in a physical sense. That Big Brother is more an idea than anything else, and I think that was a sort of little nod towards that. Interestingly, going on the religious themes, you've got sort of the uniforms that the Tetragrammaton Council wear, which is at once it's very much like the costumes that the heroes in the Matrix wear, but on the other, of course, it looks very much like a Catholic priest.
Yeah.
Of course, you've got the name cleric to go with.
Yeah, exactly. So this is all about religion, but yet at the same time, it's anti-religious. So there's a lot of irony thrown in there, just like with the name that they've chosen for the city-state, Libria, and so here everything is supposedly governed by reason, because the whole point of the drugs is to stop emotion so that people are reasoned human beings, and that's also sort of taken from Zemyatin's we as well, because they are governed by formulas rather than drugs, so that people are kept within reason. But actually, at some point they start lobotomizing them as well.
I think one of the flaws as well, if you want to understand the world and the plot, you've actually got to really listen to the propaganda in the background. A lot of scenes, you'd maybe concentrate on Christian Bale or Cleric Preston doing his thing, emoting or whatever. But in the background, you hear a lot of the reasons for how they're living. Like one point, Father explains everybody lives identical lives, and he emphasizes identical to give them the comfort that they know that the life will work out because it's been lived again and again and again. So that's why they make everything identical for everybody. But you only pick that up if you listen to the background propaganda, which you could easily tune out, especially in a theatre. I
Mm.
think that was a mistake to put in essential elements to the world in the background.
Yeah.
Yeah, I mean that's the
Even
this
even sorry
idea
to
of
interrupt, but even the director in an interview claimed that one of the big messages of his film wasn't anything to do with the Matrix. He feels quite offended about it being compared to the Matrix. His big thing was to speak out against the idea of hate crimes and hate speech and censorship. And the only part where that becomes explicit is just when Preston walks home and his son's listening to one of the father's propaganda speeches, and just before the son mutes it to talk to his father about the school kid crying, the father says, and then there was a creation of the revolutionary concept of uh, hate speech. I think it was a hate crime. He says, and then the boy mutes it to talk about the son, and it's like you could easily miss that. And this is the director's big message, according to him. In interviews after the fact, that's the big message of the film, was about that kind of censorship. But you could completely miss it because he just has this incidental background TV thing mention it.
See, I remember that scene when I heard it. If you use your imagination a bit and you throw away suspension of belief and all that, you can almost make it sound as if the government or the voice of reason in that government is a lot like what the government is um, to people on the right, accusing people of hate speech, trying to stop them doing what they're doing and making them feel bad. And we have this thing now where
I definitely think that's what he was going for.
recreational drugs now are starting to become normal, and they're even going to be starting to be sold in shops in the near future. And it's the same sort of thing, the magic elixir that makes everybody the same and everybody calm and nobody wants to fight for anything or say anything in response or revolt.
He
And
even calls the drug the opiate of the masses.
yeah, yeah. And
And
you
so
can make connections like that.
I think that was his idea. It was meant to say, oh, if you take everything now and project it into a dystopian future, it could come together. The threads could come together, this way. But I think that's a situation where it's a nice idea, but he's not realised it because he was inexperienced as a director. He admits himself, and there was inconsistency.
Yeah, yeah. I think that there's some good ideas in it, but they're poorly realized. I think that's very true. But the drug thing, that's really taken from Brave New World with this drug soma that they have,
Right.
which quells the masses and everything and keeps them happy and so on. In Brave New World, it keeps them happy rather than sort of unemotional and stuff like that. But the idea is the same, that it keeps them from rebelling and so on, and causing riots and things like that. Although ironically, in Brave New World, you have a riot when the supply of soma gets broken up. So,
Right.
uh, but anyway, that's sort of by the by. The interesting thing about Brave New World and a lot of these dystopian things, like Zemmutham, for example, he was writing against the communist regime that had sprung up and everything, although he'd been a socialist and sort of rejected it. And the same with Aldous Huxley. Aldous Huxley was very much involved in these leftist circles and everything, and knew a lot of the Fabian thinkers and so on, especially H.G. Wells. And in fact, Brave New World was a response to H.G. Wells's Men as Gods, or Men Like Gods. I can't remember which one. But these dystopian novels are actually based on real philosophy, real philosophical ideas that were being banded about at the time. And this is the thing about dystopian fiction and so on, that the fiction is sort of taken from these ideas and extrapolated into a fictional society, so that we can see what would go wrong. And this is what this director Wimmer is doing, even if in a very clumsy fashion. And he should have concentrated a little more on the ideas and a little less on the stylized violence for me, and he would have got a lot better film out of it.
Well, he said himself that in an interview that he loves to smother everything in entertainment. That was a quote from him. I thought, well, that's his Achilles heel. That's what
Mm.
ruined it.
Yeah. But the
Yeah,
thing is, in some ways, though, if you watch the movie, it the scenes that are set in the big city, I think they were filmed in like Germany and in Italy. I
Berlin.
think, yeah, it's pretty cool, some of the locations, but they all look clean, and you don't hear anybody complaining either. Everybody seems to have food. Everybody seems healthy. So it doesn't really strike me as an altogether dystopian movie. You know what I mean? It's not like
It's
the
more
future's in like
ultra
turmoil.
control rather than
Yeah,
ultra deprivation.
yeah.
Well, I mean, the thing is that if you if you have a sort of dystopian fiction, you cannot make it all bad, because if the society was all completely bad, it wouldn't be attractive to anyone. It wouldn't get off the ground in the first place. This was the fault with George Orwell's 1984, and also 1984 is, and even by Orwell's own admission, it's a bit too heavy on the ideology. You see, you've got to balance the two. Wimmer's come too heavy down on the side of entertainment, and not enough on ideas, so it becomes sort of a mindless entertainment kind of action film. Whereas 1984 is the sort of other way around, where it's a bit too heavy on the on the ideological side. Although I'll be honest, Nigel Neal made a really good film out of it. Not the second one with John Hurt, because that had nothing to do with him. I'm talking about the first one with Peter Cushing from the 1950s,
Oh,
which sort of got buried because of the one that came out with John Hurt in it.
right. See, I watched the one with John Hurt once or twice, and I don't know. It's just too depressing for me. I can't watch it. I get bored, and just the doom and gloom. I don't know why
Very gloomy.
people like it so much. Like, how can you sit and watch that and like 3 or 4 times a year? It's got nothing in there that makes me go, oh, I think I'll watch that again. I feel in a bad mood today. I'll watch a film and cheer myself up. It's just gloom.
That's right. If you watch the one with Peter Cushing in it, which was, as I say, it was written by Nigel Neal, who of course we all know from Quatermass and so on. That is a far better screenplay of the book, and it's far better acted and everything. It's far more interesting than the one with John Hurt. I don't know who wrote it, and I don't really care that much, to be quite honest. Or I don't know who wrote it or who directed it or whatever. But you're right; it's absolutely boring. It has nothing that keeps you interested in it, and so I can see why Wimmer sort of went, well, we don't want to go down that road.
Yeah.
Yeah,
Uh,
he's clearly watched all these things to kind of get an idea of what's already been done and then rip it off. But he obviously watched it, so he knew what he wanted to avoid.
I think that 1984 with John Hurt needed some. It needs someone needs to go back and add a gunfight into it just to add something remotely interesting into it.
Get Preston in there.
Yeah, just cut it in. Nobody will notice. But it's a really boring film though.
Well, what they should have perhaps is shown some of the action from the front. You know, when they're at war with East Asia or at war with Eurasia and so on. And that would have sort of made it more interesting if they'd have sort of got the troops coming home from the front and so on. You know, a bit of action from the front, troops coming home from the front, sort of demoralized and so on. That that might have sort of livened things up a bit. But to be honest, it can be done well even without that. As I say, the 1950s version does have it's far more engaging, and I think it's one, because it's far better written, and two, because it's far better acted. I mean, Peter Cushing's a great actor in general. Although, having said that, you know, John Hurt was, but not in that. That may be down to the script writing. I don't know, but certainly Cushing for me makes a better Winston Smith than Hurt ever did. It's
But yeah, I mean, for me, Equilibrium. I know it hasn't got a lot going for it. Let's be honest. And Christian Bale, I know a lot of people like him. He's not the best actor in the world. But this really kind of put him on the foundation for action movies. And this is
He
like
did
this.
not bad in the film, I think.
Yeah, I mean, how hard is it to get an actor who can act as piece of cardboard basically for 90 minutes with no
He was
emotion. I
probably
mean, he's the best
the
choice of
better
actor they
actor
could
in it.
they could have hired. We need an emotionless actor who's monotone and like boring. Who can we get? Well, we'll get Christian Bale, and he's got to pretend to be on this drug that just makes him this gloomy, unconscious robot. I mean, what better actor is there than Christian Bale?
Keanu Reeves.
Oh yeah, yeah, I forgot about him. Yeah,
Although
ironically.
when you read the interviews, the director says he had no idea going into it to even think to ask if his star was physically capable of doing the stunts he was hoping to do. So it
Well,
was pure luck that Bale is as fit as he is.
Yeah. One interesting thing I want to talk about, which you mentioned, James, which is about culture and how the people who were underground, they all again live in these shitty squalid conditions and everything, and haven't built up a culture. You were
Mm,
talking to me about this through Skype the other day.
that's right.
uh, yeah, so perhaps you can sort of put a bit of pressure on that.
It was one thing. I noticed it in the first view, and I went back in the second because I thought, maybe I've messed up. Maybe I'm being unkind to the writers and directors. But if you go through it twice, or you watch it the first time with this in mind, you notice that when you get to the underground where they've got this freedom, welcome to underground, they take you through, you've got rooms full of trinkets and just trash, absolute rubbish to our point of view, like souvenirs and stuff. There's nothing really great about them, but not a single chalk drawn piece of art. They've done nothing themselves. They've got all this freedom that they worship, but they've done absolutely nothing with it. They just hoard stuff like the bag lady from Labyrinth, just mountains of cheap trinkets and the occasional nice thing, and they just pile it up in rooms and don't do anything with it. And they don't even do anything new. That to me is the absolute killers. They create nothing. They get the freedom and they've got the feelings and emotions that have been denied to everybody, but they don't use those emotions and feelings to do anything other than gather up huge piles of garbage like a hoarder's house, and then they just walk around with this pile of garbage in a room. Where are the people saying, "Oh, I feel all this. How to express it?" Or even you think if you saw the original Mona Lisa and all, as they have in the opening scene and all these other things, they might feel inspired to at least try and draw. And they've got kids about as well, and not one kid took a bit of chalk or a stone and scratched in the concrete. It's a bizarre situation. It's actually weirder to not see even like Robert was here scribbled in a wall or something.
yeah.
Nothing at all.
Mm.
Yeah.
And that
And this is the same in pretty much all dystopian fiction.
notably we
Um,
a,
it's the same in We. They sort of hang on to these artifacts and everything that are kept in this opaque building and everything. Why there is this opaque building in the city, no one ever, this is never explained in the book, but it seems to be a big flaw in the narrative. Anyway, and it's the same if you remember with Winston Smith and this little shop of trinkets and stuff where he goes in and he gets the snow globe and everything. Uh, and uh, and so and the other big one which we haven't mentioned yet is Fahrenheit 451,
Mm.
mm,
where they all have to remember old books and everything, but they never create new books.
Mm.
They never think about coming up with new stories.
Is
and
that
you
not
think
the,
that what they should be saying is, thank goodness we've got our minds, we've got the emotions, and we've got our freedom. It doesn't matter if all those trinkets burn because they're created by the people who are still now around. It doesn't matter if you've lost a snow globe, you can make another snow globe as long as the people that could make it are still around.
is that not to suggest, or the writer suggesting that even though they do have this freedom and they're rebellious and they're part of the resistance, even still, they're still convinced that if they do what they want, they're going to suffer some kind of severe punishment for it. It's ingrained in them, and it needs somebody like the cleric Preston, I think his name is, to really inspire them. Is it not the director or the writer's attempt to do that?
I think you've been a bit generous, but
No, you think?
but
Well, maybe I'm trying too hard to defend this movie. Uh,
And the interesting thing is there's one film. It's sort of semi-dystopian, where they start kind of to recreate culture and so on, and they create paintings and so on. And that's Mad Max Beyond Thunderdome,
uh,
which is interesting because what you have. Um, we will probably be doing a podcast on this anyway in the future
we
on
should.
Mad Max. Yeah, we got to do really. But Mad Max is structured as a real trilogy because in the first Mad Max you have the collapse of society. In the second, you have when society has collapsed and and survival. And in the third, you have the rebuilding of civilization. And if you remember the kids in the cave and everything, who are sort of waiting for this messiah figure and everything, they've created all this artwork to explain their story and to explain what they're hoping for and where they're hopefully going.
Yeah, and they have like legends, and they pass on this mythology of Mad Max or Captain Rogers or something like that. I think he's called
Captain Walker.
Walker. I don't know. So Captain Rogers is something else. I think Captain Walker, and I'm sure one of the kids has like a vinyl record disc, and
That's right.
he can't they can't figure out that you need to put it on the record player and play it. Uh, it's little things like that, little connections to the old world, which can unlock secrets to the rebuilding of the next one. And it is a trilogy, and a lot of people knock the third Mad Max film, but I love it. I absolutely love that movie.
I enjoyed it too. And I think though you're also with that notice of the artwork and the story creation. So in a way, it does actually show a better freedom in post-apocalyptic or dystopian situation, however you want to describe it, than what happened in Equilibrium.
Mm,
Even I mean that just shows you nobody even you don't even hear in the background like a mother telling their kid a story. Even if it's a bad story, a nonsense story, a terrible song, somebody singing out of tune, anything. But all you ever see them do is just shuffle around, gathering clothes, trinkets, and food. Really bare minimum survival, which they already had completely sufficiently in the city.
mm,
So you think, well, what was the purpose of your escape? To get a lesser quality of life doing exactly the same thing? Their
yeah,
freedom, if they don't express their freedom, then they don't even have it. I
yeah,
mean, you could say I'm free, but if you don't actually express the freedom, then it doesn't tangibly exist any more than it did when they were under the drug.
yep. And it's the same with Mad Max Part 3. This idea that these kids, even though they don't know any better, they're living in effectively a paradise, and they want to leave it and go off to Bartertown. And you think to yourself, why do they want to do this? Where are they going to go that's better than where they are right now? But they do it anyway, and they get up and they walk out into the desert, and the shit hits the fan basically for them. And I love that movie.
Yeah, yeah. We've got to do that in the near future. The Mad Max films. But yeah, it's interesting that what you said about the expression of freedom, and that they don't express their freedom once they've got it, and so it makes freedom pointless. And I think that this is something that is very relevant to our situation now, to be quite honest, because what you've got is sort of a liberal totalitarianism who they say that they have reason on their side and so on, even though it's a complete belief system and not based on any kind of scientific reason at all. um, and they're becoming more totalitarian and everything, but yet what are the people on the right actually doing? Very few of
Mm.
them are actually creating anything. Very few of them are getting involved in culture and so on. And this, of course, has been very personally disappointing to me with where when I've been running Mjolnir magazine and so on, that there aren't that many people interested in that, and so as you say, what's the point of them having freedom if they're not going to do anything with that freedom?
I think it's hard for artists and creative people to want to put their stuff out there and have that stigma attached to them from the get-go, which is always going to be, oh wait, you're that guy that's a Nazi, right? And they won't want to connect with you. And I feel personally, as someone who creates music, I feel reluctant to show the world and put it out there because um, I haven't got really like a big audience to really put it out to. And it's going to be everything against me if they ever find out my personal convictions or personal views. So even though I have this desire and creative ability, something's holding me back from really putting it out there just in case, uh, my life could be ruined as a result.
Well, it's a carefully crafted sense of pressure, and then they add on to obviously the sense of shame
Yeah.
through people echoing it. That's all knowingly created. I mean, that doesn't happen by accident. These people understand psychology. The media spends a fortune designing these things, and that's why they're desperate to control social media, and the internet, which has this chance of the genie escaping the bottle, and they're trying to stuff it carefully back in and bring back the single main message, and with it the echo chamber of shame and fear of stepping out of line, because everybody who isn't some sort of psychopath always has some sense of shame, some sense of peer pressure, and
Yeah.
it's that that's a positive thing when it's in the positive hands, in your own people's hands, and it's your own people's destiny. But it becomes a very negative thing when somebody else can control it and use that to guide you gently over the years.
Mm.
And I think it's one of these things that there's definitely signs of as I say, the genie escaping the bottle, and try as you can, try as hard as you can. You can never stuff that fully back in. And when people get a taste of the real stuff, you don't forget it, and you can't really go back to the synthetic, the cheap bargain basement version after you've had the top quality steak.
Yeah.
So I think with that kind of thing, yeah, it'll. I can understand David's disappointment, and I think everybody that sees these things and kind of hopes to see some sort of resurgence will feel that. But I'm not too disappointed, even when I see the obvious numpties, idiots, frauds, fakes, because when I see these succeed, the phonies, I know that means there's a market, in the sense that there's all these people desperate for something real.
Mm.
If I saw a guy selling, doing, fake Mjolnir at the movies reviews, I'd say, well, at least I know somebody's interested in an alternative point of view in
Mm.
that subject. It doesn't matter that entirely that these things are leading people astray, because from I see that as it won't hold up in time anyway, because we know it won't hold up, because we're all getting to this point now in ourselves. I
Yeah.
mean, how many people online do you see talking about things that a few years ago you'd never see, never hear?
Yeah.
That's and it's like a snowball going down the hill. And yeah, I mean, even if you had some fantastic exponential growth curve, if you ever see a mathematic exponential growth curve, you'll see, the majority of it is a straight line near at the zero line. And and that's with the most rapid growth possible. And then
Right.
you see it pick up and it shoots upwards towards the end. But most of the time, it looks dead, nothing happening, because you've got to get to that point. And I think that's sort of where we are. We're in that sort of exciting pause before the the orchestra builds.
Yeah. Yeah. It feels that way. And
Yeah, well, I hope you're right. But at the moment, what I see is very much those kind of people, the so-called rebels, against the city-state, against Libria, who are just kind of existing and not really doing a great deal. Although in the end, you know, they do come out and rebel.
I think as
But
well.
but
I ca-
but they haven't got anything culturally. They haven't. There's this sort of idea that they have to have the rebellion first before the culture.
Hmm.
You
Uh,
could imagine in that situation though, like if that had obviously this hasn't been going on forever, or at least the attrition rate for these people it hasn't been going on forever because you don't see any elderly with these people. You see a few middle aged, but you think, well, these people could have come off the drug recently. You know, there's not a generational build up showing. What if in that situation, much like ours, they get off the drug, they get off the propaganda, the mainstream, and they clutch to all this old stuff. They clutch to whatever panacea, you know, the next panacea, the easy fix. But they need that time to mope around their trinkets to get to realize, no, this is another thing I'm just going to chain myself to. It's a falsehood. You need that breath to recover, and then you can create. If you think of it that way, you know, it's they can't just go from brainwashed to creating with a click of a finger. You know, they need to learn to crawl, then walk and run.
yeah, it would be more interesting, I think, to make a film that showed you know, more of a positive image of the rebellion, because rebellions don't just happen like that. You know, rebellions, even if you look at something like the rebellion against the Weimar Republic. You know, I have nothing to do with National Socialism and everything, but even the National Socialists came from somewhere, and they came from various cultural groupings before that. And it's the same with all revolutions. The first step of revolution is culture. You have to have a grounding in philosophy and in art and so on to get the ideas across to have a revolution in the first place. So that you know, these films and these texts to me show a sort of falsehood about creating revolution.
Yeah, almost saying that they're just going to snap out of it and rise up.
It's the same sort of trap as the people that believe in apocalypse will sort everything out. Really,
Yeah,
they're forgetting some of the steps along the way. They think that you can just go, you know, with the apocalypse, it's bad situation, apocalypse. Now we just get to rebuild and there's no problems. With the other ones where you get the dystopian instead of the apocalypse, it's dystopia then to some sort of revolution, you know, or dystopia to problems fixed and various sort of shortcuts. I think that's where it's this, you know, misleading or sort of too wishful thinking, if you see what I mean.
yeah. There's no like long-term effects in the movie that you can really go and think too deeply about. It does kind of fall apart in many parts of the movie. Things don't really make sense. It just seems like it's a accumulation of all these movies, cut up, sliced up, and put into one, and that's why it doesn't really flow that well. You don't really see anything in regards to the World War III that was supposed to have happened or why it happened. It doesn't get into too much depth about why that happened in the first place. All you know that is like everything's all clean and shiny now, and society seems to be getting along. They're taking these drugs, and they've got this enforcement division making sure that they take their daily dose of drugs. It's kind of strange. It, is there anything that could have been done to make it better, in your guys' opinion? Like, what would you have done differently if you had the helm of that movie?
Well, for a start, I think that one of the great problems is just like with the Matrix. You know, when the good guys are all living in shit and squalor and so on, and they're defending the shit and squalor and so on. And that's the big problem with the sort of heroes, in that they're like James was saying, they're just gathering stuff, but they're gathering sort of dusty and dirty stuff and everything. And so you have this dichotomy of the clean, which is bad, the pristine and clean and everything, and all that stuff is kind of bad. And the modernity and all the television screens and the plasma screens and the computer screens and so on, and all that's kind of in your mind as being bad because it's associated with the regime, whereas all the kind of old and musty and antique stuff and everything, all this is good, and that gives a mindset of living in the past. And you can't create a revolution against the regime if you haven't got a vision of the future. So
Wouldn't it?
so that would have been a better thing to do. It would have better to have the rebels who who were creating something for the future with the remnants of the past. That would have made it far more real to me, and it would have made it far more authentic and far more in tune with how a real revolution works.
Imagine
Yeah.
if they just had a couple of scenes where as he was getting taken through, let's say, the underground bit, he glanced and there was some kids drawing in the walls. You could hear maybe even like, imagine like a revolutionary song. One of them would do something against the state. Somebody would, in that situation, have some sort of cutting song or amusing song, and they could maybe glance at some sort of, early agricultural attempt, something to build and sort of build their own society, because they must have had something,
Yeah, or
that made
some
it,
motto or something like
yeah,
that.
they could have had, so they could have shown creativity in kitchens and just general life, the food, which obviously the food in a place that you're not allowed to sense offend is going to be pretty bland. Well, these people now have freedom to cook. You could have shown people frying stuff and cooking, kids laughing, drawing, people doing songs, and that would have shown it's just normal everyday expressions. But in that world, it's a rebellion by just enjoying life and expressing and enjoying it to the fullest.
Yeah,
That would have been a
because
nice scene.
that's right. Because even in 1984, Winston goes down into the area of the proles, and and has a pint, and well, not a pint. It's a half liter or whatever, because it's all in metric. But the old guy remembers the pints and so on, and and he chats with the old guy and everything. And even though these people are completely alien to him, there is a way of life there, and a way of life that he thinks, well, if that was kind of used as inspiration for the future, we might get somewhere. So, so there is that. There is a sort of a normality in 1984 that you can relate to.
An
That,
authenticity in their life.
that's right. Yeah. And of course it's sort of against the middle class sort of life, but yet it has an authenticity to it. Whereas middle class life, of course, has been completely taken over by socialist politics, and which is actually exactly what's happened. Um, uh, but um, but there is sort of that inspiration within the working class who are still hanging onto a traditional way of life uh, that could be used as something better in the future. But even that, I don't think is quite enough. I think that there has to be some form of creativity that has to be going on, something higher than that that can spur on a a political revolution.
Hmm. And do you think there was any real intent or deliberate intent by making Preston's main nemesis in the movie the mouthy, cocky black guy? Do you think there was a deliberate reason behind that in the movie?
I felt it was just a cliche that maybe blundered into. I wasn't sure if there was any message beyond just including something that you would expect in a Hollywood film.
Because if you look at the front cover of the DVD and all the posters that came out, that shows them side by side, and you kind of assume by that poster that the movie is going to be about this, Christine Bale and this black guy, and they're going to team up and overthrow this tyrannical government or whatever. But when you watch the movie, you realize that that black guy is basically like the muscle for this group of people who are supplying the nation with drugs to keep them quiet, keep them in control. And their main head honcho, their main muscle's a black guy. And he's not like the nice black guy or anything like that, which a lot of movies promote. Especially nowadays, the black guy is always the good guy, the wise one, the one that knows everything, that can give you all the answers. But in this one, he's the asshole that you want to see die, like the main antagonist of the movie, and he's devious as well.
They did go out their way to
To make him look like
as
a
unpleasant as
yeah,
possible.
yeah. That's what I mean. But then again, like we said earlier on in the podcast, you almost get this impression that the director or the writer is making this future society to be like a fascist society, even by the locations that they picked. The swastika flag, the soldiers or the cops with the black uniforms. I mean, it's a direct hint at fascism and Nazis. But yet they have this obligatory black guy who's like the muscle for them. So it must have been deliberate in that way.
It's interesting because I mean this is I would say it's as much a liberal leftist society as much as it is a national socialist society or whatever. To me, they're pretty much similar in any case.
Mm.
The National Socialists and as a proper right wing dictator, which was Engelbert Dollfuss, who was killed by the National Socialists, but he was the dictator of Austria. As he noted that the NSDAP and the communists of the Soviet Union, their regimes were very similar, and he aligned himself more with Italian fascism, which was quite different. And this is why, of course, Italian fascism doesn't get tarred with quite the same brush as National Socialism does. But anyway, sort of looking at that sort of racial aspect, I find it interesting that this is headed by the Tetragrammaton Council.
Mm.
That is sort of, you have a hint towards Jewishness there, of course, as we've discussed,
Mm-hmm.
with the Yahweh, four letters, YHWH as it would be transliterated into Latin characters. But you have this sort of Jewish, semi-Jewish head with the black muscle.
Yeah, yeah.
And this is a theme actually, and it runs throughout television. It actually gets caricatured in the Blues Brothers, where one of the slogans that the Nazi Party in the Blues Brothers shouts is the black man is being used as muscle by the Jew. And of course, that's a caricature. But what they're doing is actually putting the truth in the mouth of someone who is ridiculous, who is made to be ridiculous in the film. And you can see it quite a lot. You can see it by the fact that the boxer Jack Johnson was trained by a Jew, to fight all the white heavyweights and everything. And you can see it on Judge Judy, where you have the black guy, who's the I don't know what they call the guy who's the policeman in the court. He's called Bird anyway. And so you have the Jewish brain and the black brawn again, and this happens quite a lot. Saul Alinsky, back in the 1970s, used blacks as muscle. One of his ideas actually was to get blacks to go into concerts of classical music and start farting.
Wow.
You know, to break down polite white society.
Oh.
And so this is how they use black people and abuse them at the same time, because let's make no mistake, they don't uh, they don't want black people in Israel.
Yep.
And they don't want them in their societies, but they certainly want them in white societies, and they want them causing mischief in white societies, and they always try to sort of put them up above the white man, even though I mean, the narrative is that the sort of white man in the past being the slave master and the black man being the slave and so on. But actually, that was far more prevalent with a Jewish slave master and a black slave. And I've forgotten which black academic spoke about this, but he wrote a book about it, and he was immediately shot down, by all the Jewish academics and everything. Anti-Semitism, and so on. I'll have to have a look at who that was, but you can research that on the internet easy enough. But this goes on with that the Jews use the blacks to do their dirty work, and to be the muscle to their brain, because the Jews are highly intelligent people. Let's make no mistake, but they don't have any physical aspect really. They're not physically impressive, or they're not athletes and so on.
And plus the fact that to go along with that, you could maybe argue that that's what the movie nods towards, except for the fact it was produced by a lot of Jewish people, one of which was Harvey Weinstein. But if you remember in the movie, um, the way father communicates through Sean Pertwee is through giant TV screens. And that's how they communicate their nonsense to us, through TV screens. The bigger, the better. Now they got curved TV screens, and to make it more effective on like your psychological standards. This movie shows that if you take these drugs, this magic elixir, you're constantly being told what to do and how to think by these giant TV screens. They have a Nazi sort of swastika flag. That, like I said, the soldiers dressed up in black, and the black guy is the muscle. That doesn't really strike me as an altogether Nazi or fascist thing, if I'm honest with you, which is why I think was this deliberate.
They also had the voice of father, who, as you find out, is really the actual leader. He's blatantly feeling and enjoying all the finer things in life. So you find out this sort of plot twist that it's a complete hypocrisy at the end.
And he's got about 50 guards, and they're all dressed in, I think it's like red helmets. They look like the Emperor's Guard in Star Wars or something. They got these red helmets, I think, and he's living this life of luxury. And right at the end, he says something like, "I'm a human. I live. I feel. Are you willing to take all that from me?" And Preston says, "Absolutely." Or he gives this cheesy one-liner and shoots him.
Yeah, that's very much ripped off of 1984, when Winston finds out that O'Brien is living in quite luxurious circumstances and sipping champagne and so on.
So yeah, I mean, could you maybe watch the film with that mindset and think, well, this is a little bit like Dark City is saying that these people are controlling these situations, and could you suspend your belief that much and say this is? I don't want to say this film's about the Jews, but could it be? Could you think of it in that way?
Well, the director himself definitely said it was against the idea of the whole hate crime, thought crime, which is what we're seeing crash down right now, on top
Hmm.
of everybody, both legally and with all these social media shutdowns and so on. So that was something that he was talking about, speaking out against back then, during the film's time. So it does seem to be partly his intention. How far he went with that, though, he probably either wouldn't say or he just hasn't said. So, but at least he was against the idea of this heavy censorship, heavy control, and the great restriction of expression that we're
Hmm.
seeing in politics, art, and so on. It was just unfortunately marred, I think, by an imperfect ability on his part to express it properly.
Yeah, yeah.
Yeah, I think that. I mean, it's got to be subtly done to get anything like that into the mainstream. You cannot get anything into the mainstream that is overt. So artists who are against certain things, they will indeed subvert certain things. They can't go overboard or anything like that. But it's not too far fetched to say that he was thinking about those things when he made the film. I don't think that that's too far fetched.
Because let's be
He was
honest,
definitely not with. Sorry.
whenever you see something to do with Nazis in the media, or on a newspaper, a TV show, every single week, the Mail on Sunday, there's something about the Nazis and what they did bad all that time ago. And it's the sort of thing you think or could assume that they would pretend that's what it is, like with the fascist flag. You're under control by this fascist state when they're not really, because why would a fascist state of Nazis have like black guys as their muscle?
Yeah,
And have like the tetragrammaton, your word.
Hmm.
yeah, it did actually remind me very much of a series in the 1980s on ITV, as I remember, and it was called Knights of God. And this was about these a sort of quasi-fascist takeover of Britain by people dressed in black and so on, and who called themselves the Knights of God but banned Christianity, and and wanted to do something along more Nietzschean ideas and so on. Although interestingly, in that series, looking back on it, and I watched it last year again because someone had put it up on YouTube. 'Cause it had never reappeared on television. But the second in command was obviously an overt homosexual. And
Hmm.
I don't think you could have gotten away with that now. But and he's the most sort of psychopathic and sociopathic and sadistic and power hungry and everything.
Hmm.
And so that again, I'm pretty sure that they got that idea in under the radar very subtly. So, as I say, I don't think that it's a big stretch of the imagination to say that they were getting something under the radar with this tetragrammaton idea.
Yeah, it just, I mean, it could just be nothing. But when you make connections like that, you can tell someone's done some amount of research into it. And I don't think anybody would really be that dumb that they could think that a Nazi group would use a Jewish word as the name of their enforcement police, unless somebody was like having fun and putting it out there deliberately to see if anybody noticed it.
It could be like when people take a statement, like you see recently on Twitter, or somebody takes a letter written by one group and then pretends this was said by, Hitler or some famous person, or, and they turn it around by then revealing at the end, aha, you thought it was this particular villain, and it turns out it's this guy you thought was a good guy or a victim,
Yeah.
stating these monstrous things. It could be a film version of that almost, if you look at
Well,
it that way.
yeah, that's what I've convinced myself of anyway. But like I said, it could just be really bad writing on the other hand.
Yeah, I mean it's difficult to say because there is quite a bit of bad writing in it. I mean the Sean Bean gets a lot of the worst lines, I think. You
Yeah,
know the Yates that was cobbled into the script was pretty appallingly done, and very it was really clumsy. But and Sean Bean is not the finest actor, and certainly not the most subtle actor. And his death scene was, I felt, quite embarrassing, to be honest. It was done so clumsily. It was almost comedic.
And when he
yeah,
gets shot and lies back in the pew, you can clearly see it's not him. I don't know what happened there. It was a non-stunt scene because all he's doing is just lying back after getting shot, and you see it's some guy half his age that looks nothing like him.
maybe he walked off set. Maybe he's like, man, this movie's crap, and he just got up and walked out, and he
He said,
wasn't
"You've used me
able.
again. I'm fed
Yeah,
up dying in these films.
yeah.
I'm going home."
I thought I'd at least make it half an hour into the movie. Yeah.
That's right. It's interesting, of course. John Bean. There are two things about John Bean. He dies in every film, and he plays a Yorkshireman in every film.
Yeah.
At least we know that in the far future, Yorkshire's still going strong.
Yes, that's right. Well, it is pretty ancient, as I was talking about to you guys earlier. The oldest house in Europe has been found, which is 9,000 years old in near Scarborough in Yorkshire, and of course they have found the remains of the ceremonial masks that were used in some kind of ritual that have stag antlers on them, and they're 11,000 years old. So there you go. Just as Sean Bean, I should say, John Bean is a nationalist leader. Sean Bean
Uh-oh.
is the oh yes. Just as Sean Bean is sort of the symbol of culture in this film, equally Yorkshire is the beginnings of culture in Europe. There you go.
Yeah. And just in case Sean
It's
Bean is
me.
actually listening, we're not saying Sean Bean's a nationalist, so nobody get their lawyers on us.
I noticed, just thinking of the Sean Bean's accent, did you notice there was quite a variety of accents? They hadn't, there was the Irish woman, and there was American accents, there's Yorkshire accent. It's odd that they let, you know, let them have this kind of mishmash accents in what you'd think is a very conformist society. I wonder if that was deliberate or just an oversight.
Or maybe they're just such bad actors that they couldn't figure that out. Because none of them
Yeah.
are great actors. Everybody likes a Sean Bean movie, but he's not a great actor. Neither is Christian Bale, and neither is the guy that played Robert the Bruce in Braveheart, whose name I keep forgetting.
Angus McFadden, I think.
Is he actually Scottish? That guy? Is he
I'm not sure if it's Scottish
Irish
or
or Irish? Yeah.
Scottish.
Yeah.
Yeah, well, if he's
I think
Scottish,
he was born in Glasgow.
right. Well, he did change his accent for the film.
Yeah.
True.
So yeah, we had a decent actor in
Yeah.
there.
Although he was a bit chubby for the whole gun kata thing at the end. It looked a bit like a slap fight outside a pub or something, didn't it?
I got.
Yeah, that was pretty dreadful, to be honest. In fact, the whole sword fighting scene towards the end was absolutely appalling, especially where the black guy's face slides off there. That
Oh,
was
that,
ridiculous.
that was like something at the Mortal Kombat films.
Yeah. Yeah. But the thing is, I think the fighting was based upon like the manga anime cartoons. It was supposed to be like ridiculous because it was supposed to
I
represent the
think it was.
ridiculousness of the story and like the
Yeah.
society.
I think it was more based on Hong Kong stuff
You think?
rather
Yeah.
than anime. The Matrix was anime heavy rip-off, and then the first Matrix and the second and third Matrix, you could see just it wasn't even subtle ripping off Hong Kong. They even had this scene with the Chinese guy fighting, and it was just with the music in the background. But with Equilibrium, it was definitely more the Hong Kong tradition of kung fu stuff, and you see a lot of influences there with the choreography and the style of the fighting. I
Which
think that's their inspiration.
I,
The whole at the end with the swords and stuff.
mhm.
I mean, there was no real reason for it otherwise.
I really liked the gun kata stuff. I thought it was really cool and mindless, but I liked it because if anybody hasn't seen it before, it's supposed to be this idea that these clerics or these like police officers, they're taught how to shoot in a kung fu style. So every punch is a gunshot. So it maximizes their ability to, shoot with more efficiency. And it is really cool, but it's absolutely ludicrous, but it's fun. And
I like when you see them explain it about all the idea was they were trained so much about the statistical probability of how a fight would go, where people would stand, where they would shoot, and so on. I thought, wouldn't it have been interesting? It sounds daft, but if they'd went all out on that, the idea was that you weren't even fighting in the normal sense of seeing your opponent and reacting. You were working purely off of some learn by rote, because they do actually state that in it. They learn by rote. They learn
right,
by rote all these statistical things, and just remember, oh yeah, when somebody's standing there and leans that way, I lean this way. It would have made for an interesting fight, especially then they could have contrasted that with somebody who isn't working within that system. But
hmm
it would have been interesting if they just went all out with that. And I think that idea was only really shown in that first initial fight in the darkness that David mentioned,
hmm
where you see him standing in the dark, and that's why he stands still in the dark, and then he doesn't even move his head. He points in the directions where he knows statistically, mathematically, the people are likely to be,
yeah,
and then walks out. But if they'd gone with that, it could have been interesting to see how he could have pushed that idea. It would have been original. It would have been an original idea I hadn't seen done. And then, though, it just turned into kung fu.
yeah, yeah,
What you
Well,
see is just reacting to what's happening. And then you think, well, what was all this gun kata and mathematical probability thing about then?
yeah,
well, the ridiculous. I mean, that scene in the dark is doubly ridiculous because one, he should have been shot, and not only should he have been shot, but the two kind of lines of guns facing each other should have shot each other. You know, you've got gunmen on opposite sides of the room, facing each other, shooting. They would have bloody blown each other to pieces.
You don't like that scene, do you? I can tell you don't like
It's
that scene
ridiculous.
very much.
It's
Maybe they were standing really high up against the ceiling and they were shooting down on really big boxes.
no, because it shows them beforehand go in there and crouch down and take up positions. So
They
no,
were
no, and
crouching down to
again.
pick up ladders to climb up, and you
Ah,
couldn't see the ladders because it was dark.
that scene. My eyes. I can't. My eyes. I'm blind. I
Yeah.
cannot see anything again. It's impressed on my eyes like I've looked at the sun for too long.
Yeah.
It's horrible.
Mjolnir at the movies is its first breakdown on microphone. I like that scene.
On eBay this film just for that.
It is terrible if I think about it, but yeah. But it looks good. That's the important thing. As long as it looks good.
Yeah.
This review turned into something more like an intervention.
Yeah.
It's not good.
I think we ought to leave it there, didn't we,
Yeah.
gentlemen? for one episode.
Absolutely.
So until the next time, then I'm David Yorkshire, wishing you a good evening.
And I'm Neil Westwood. Have a good day or night.
And I'm James. Good evening to all.
Bye for now.